Secretary Merrill is Connecticut's 73rd Secretary of State. She is focused on modernizing Connecticut's elections, business services, and improving access to public records. Since taking office, she has supported and expanded democratic participation, ensuring that every citizen's rights and privileges are protected and that every vote is counted. Secretary Merrill has worked to expand voter participation through Election Day and online voter registration. Prior to her election as Secretary of State, she served as state representative from the 54th General Assembly District for 17 years, representing the towns of Mansfield and Chaplin. And she's a graduate of the University of Connecticut. And with that, please go right ahead.
Do I need to do? Yes,
Nope.
There we go. And I'm glad you mentioned the piano thing because I wouldn't have thought to mention that, honestly, for this audience. But thank you for knowing that. Yes, at a very young age, I played the piano quite a lot. You know, I didn't even realize that most states or a lot of states don't have a post-election audit process. They should have, because I think it is one thing that makes the public feel very secure about the election. And it's worth it just for that, if nothing else. We have been doing it for 10 years. We audit 10% of the precincts. We have about 760 precincts in Connecticut. So we conducted a pilot program using new high-speed scanners, pretty much off-the-shelf, inexpensive commercial components, scanners, projector, computer, and overhead screen. We have a partnership with the University of Connecticut Voting Center, which is a great partnership we've developed with their engineering department, their computer science engineering department. They have developed expertise in developing such programs, and they developed for us a program that could do the post-election audit. 7 districts were randomly selected to participate, and it was amazing. We just processed thousands of ballots an hour. And it really saved so much cost for the towns, because when they get selected for this random audit, it's the lottery you don't want to win because it's very expensive and time consuming. And this shaved, you know, almost all, you know, it probably is now 10% of the time and probably 5% of the cost to do this. So we're very pleased with the results. Thank you to the Commission for allowing us to develop this. I think it can be very well used by everyone in the country. Now that we've field tested it, and we're planning to go with all our districts in the municipal election coming up. So I think I'll stop there, and there's lots more we could talk about, but I think the bottom line for me is this was the smoothest election I've been part of since I was elected in 2010. It really, I think some things that we've been doing, trying to streamline and update and modernize a lot of things without going too far, I think are really coming home, and I think you're seeing that in the results. So thanks very much.
Veronica, I was going to let everyone. I was screwed up, so you know this. You know this. You gotta say it louder then. So,
To graph and read.
okay. Election protection, election prepare. It's been a long day already. Election preparation and support manager for North Carolina Board of Elections. If you want to say a little bit about yourself and then talk about the
Sure.
do your testimony, we would very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman Hicks, and thank you, Commissioner McCormick and Commissioner Masterson, for this opportunity. I'm Veronica de Graffenried. I'm the Elections Preparation and Support Manager with the North Carolina State Board of Elections. I've been with the State Board of Elections for a little over 8 years, originally from North Carolina, and I am a Tar Heel, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
All right.
All right. So again, on behalf of Kim Strack, who's the Executive Director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, and on behalf of our 5-member bipartisan Board of Elections, our agency staff, and the numerous election officials in our 100 counties throughout our state, again, I would like to thank the United States Elections Assistance Commission for this opportunity to participate in this public meeting and present as a panelist for the debriefing of the 2016 general election. As the elections preparation and support manager, I work a lot with our county boards of elections and administering elections, and that's the grunt work that I do in the state. So I don't spend as much time or any time really at all talking to the media. I do the everyday grind of what it takes to run an election. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the general data and statistics in North Carolina. Between March 2016 and November, our county boards of elections, again 100 of them, conducted 3 separate election events in our state this year for more than 1,300 unique statewide or multi-county or local contests. Now, turnout during these election events range anywhere from 7.7% to 69% for the statewide general election. Over 7,600,000 unique ballots were tabulated or counted in our state. Voters in our state may cast their ballots either by mail or in person during 17 days of one-stop early voting or in person on Election Day. To tabulate these votes, our counties use voting equipment manufactured by North Carolina's only certified voting systems provider. We use ES&S. Most of our counties use optical scan, old optical scan voting equipment to tabulate votes. About less than a third of them use DREs, which incidentally are scheduled to be decertified beginning in 2018. So next year we will be working on a process to certify possibly new voting systems in our state. In addition to the precinct tabulators, several North Carolina counties also use a central count scanner to tabulate, for instance, by mail or provisional ballots. Other election technology. Beyond voting systems, North Carolina has improved its use of other election technologies. Specifically, 55% more counties in North Carolina used electronic poll books for the 2016 general election compared to 2012. A very significant increase considering that the increase between the number of people who voted in the 2012 general, which is like 4.5 million, to 4.7 million this year. Again, a comparable amount, but more voters are being serviced in our counties using electronic poll books, which certainly speed the time it takes to move a voter through the voter check-in process. It reduces the time it takes for a county to enter voter history, for instance, and it increases auditing capabilities, and it improves the accuracy of voter history. In addition, back in 2014, North Carolina developed a new election night reporting application and made it part of our state elections information management system. At the same time, we also developed an election results web application, and these two applications were certainly enhanced for the 2016 election period. And the addition of this functionality has improved immeasurably valuable. Together, they provide a real-time audit of pre-election as well as post-election output. So with that being said, I just want to touch on a few observations about the 2016 general election or primary election as well in North Carolina. Without a doubt, North Carolina election officials valiantly met several challenges in our state throughout this election period, and they did an amazing job conducting elections despite various shifts to election administration due to ongoing litigation. And to help our county boards of elections, the State Board of Elections developed and funded uniform election training, official training videos, and printed voting site resource materials that we felt we needed to do to help our election officials. However, it truly was the ground zero implementation of these local election officials who sometimes only had a very few hours, just a few hours of training, that truly made our elections successful. So as a North Carolina citizen, I thank them for their service. Now, in the lead up to the 2016 general election, like other election jurisdictions, our State Board of Elections, our office fielded countless phone calls and emails from media members and concerned citizens about the possibility of a rigged election. the hacking of computer systems, and widespread voter fraud. And as my agency looks back over the election season, we assert with confidence that none of those scenarios played out in our state. And so regardless of the source of the concerns, the measures that have kept and continue to keep our elections sound are comprehensive safeguards combined with targeted preventive maintenance adopted by our state, the State Board of Elections, and our 100 county boards of elections. In the end, 2016, the general election brought more voters to the polls in a general election than any other election in North Carolina. Nearly 4.8 million North Carolinians participated in the process. And so that represents, again, 69% of the registered voters in our state. Pretty strong turnout. And finally, I just want to touch on, because North Carolina's been on the news just a little bit, that certainly as the election results came in on November 8th, it became very evident that there were a few close statewide contests that could potentially lead to protests, recounts, and other post-election processes. And these post-election processes, understand, are important to the overall integrity of our election system. Candidates, political parties, and citizens must be allowed to openly exercise their right under the law to ensure that the results, that they were accurate. And our election systems in our state was placed under a microscope. Dozens of election protests were filed, most of which were dismissed by the county boards of elections. Also, the State Board of Elections ordered the recounting of more than 90,000 ballots in one of our counties after a memory limitation in election software on election night caused concerns about the accuracy of the results. Now, the recount confirmed that the election night results were, that they were accurate. There were only minor variations, which are to be expected when you're running tens of thousands of ballots through a machine, the second time around. Some protests are continuing. Even as of today, there are protests that are still being heard. And that's fine, because it's important to let these matters proceed, because the right to protest is a central tenet of American democracy. And so, as expressed by Executive Director Strack, our agency wants all American citizens to know, in terms of for North Carolina, that the 2016 election results were conducted fairly and accurately, and that the results of every race from the bottom of the ballot to the top of the ballot reflects voters' wishes. And in conclusion, I just want to highlight a couple of high-level takeaways that I want to end with, of things that are important to us, and I know that they're important to you as well. And it's the fact that it's important that election officials are well trained and that they are provided with the tools and the resources that will effectively allow them to carry out their duties. It's important that voting equipment receives more than adequate preventive maintenance on an annual basis. It's important for election administrators to conduct end-to-end testing of all functional and procedural processes prior to every single election. And it is important to reconcile ballots and understand what that reconciliation process is about, that the number of ballots cast equals the number of people who participated or the number of people who voted. And it's important, certainly, to audit the data down to the micro level. Assess the lowest common denominator across all access points. And those are the things that we're going to be focused on, in the elections to come. And again, I thank you for your time.
And our last speaker on this panel, also a
Thank you, Chairman Hicks, Commissioners Masterson and McCormick, for having Rhode Island at the table today. And it's also a pleasure to serve on the panel with Secretary Merrill and Veronica DeGraffenreid. Okay, good. It It was a very exciting year in Rhode Island, and I'm not sure if many know that the way Rhode Island runs elections is that there are two state agencies that handle elections at the state level: the State Board of Elections and the Secretary of State's office. And I am the Director of Elections for Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea, and representing her today. And the Secretary, actually, I have a quick. So one of the Secretary's main goals when she was elected was to modernize elections in Rhode Island. And we obviously had the 3 statewide elections this year: the presidential primary, the state primary, and the general election. But we also had some other exciting things go on in Rhode Island this year, in which we purchased new voting equipment. We also put together a pilot program for electronic poll books, and we also rolled out online voter registration. So I just want to quickly talk about our year when it comes to the new technology. The voting equipment. And back in the summer of 2015, Secretary Gorbea received the authority legislatively to purchase new voting equipment. Up until April of this year, we've been using voting equipment that was purchased in 1997. And so Secretary Gorbea felt it very important that we look to purchase new voting equipment as soon as possible. And we were able to do that relatively quickly. We received the legislative approval in July of 2015. And the first thing we did was we put together a voting equipment task force so that we could get as many folks to the table as possible. We had over 21 community organizations that were part of this task force. The 3 recognized political parties in the state, the NAACP, Common Cause, League of Women Voters, state and local election officials, came together to figure out what it is that we wanted in our next voting system. And so out of that came the request for proposal for the new voting equipment. And I want to take a minute here, too, to thank the EAC for their help in us putting out the RFP. I know I spent many of hours on the phone and via email with Commissioner Masterson and with Brian and with Jessica. The EAC team was great, and we looked to the EAC for help to guide us through the process. I mean, we certainly took advantage of the portal that was on the website with all of the other RFPs. I mean, I certainly think it made our work a lot easier. There's no need to reinvent the wheel when other jurisdictions and the EAC has helped others doing it. So we appreciate the help that you provided us, not only with the new voting equipment, but also with the electronic poll books. And we went through the normal process with the RFP and the evaluation period and selected ES&S as the vendor for our voting equipment. We were able to use the voting equipment for the first time in our September primary. I believe we have the latest state primary in the country. September 13th was our primary this year. And we rolled out our new voting equipment in the September primary in every one of our polling locations, and it went well. We obviously also used them in November, and overwhelmingly and generally speaking, the system rolled out quite nicely, and we're very happy with the new voting equipment. I do have the word transition up there. Obviously, when voters have been voting on the same equipment since 1997, there is a transition process to new voting equipment. And our office sponsored over 120 voter information events in which we would go to every possible event you can think of: county fairs, senior centers, community centers, schools, supermarkets. We were everywhere showing the new voting equipment because we wanted to make sure that voters knew exactly what to expect on Election Day. Because it was a big change. Even though we're still using optical scan machines, we wanted to be sure that voters knew exactly what they were going to be voting on. That's we did quite an extensive job of getting the equipment out there. We had the same voting machine that we brought around the state, and it was say that it did very well in our demonstrations. The next thing I want to electronic poll book pilot. In which we used that same voting equipment task force that I talked about with the voting equipment, and we also discussed electronic poll books. It was very clear throughout the country that the next greatest thing is electronic poll books, certainly essential to efficiently run election. And so we went through the same process where the task force gave us some recommendations about e-poll books, also worked with the EAC and other state election directors on RFI and RFP information. We did the proposal, and we ultimately went with a pilot program for 2016, which we had electronic poll books in 37 of our precincts for the statewide primary on September 13th. We have about 420 polling places. 37 of them used the poll books for the primary, and then we expanded that a little bit to 57 for the November election. And I can tell you that overwhelmingly, the poll book pilot was a success. We were talking about it before this morning. The e-poll books are one piece of technology that I think everybody wins. Everybody sees an improvement. You've got the voters, it's an easier check-in process. The poll workers have less paper around, and it's easier for them to check in voters by scanning the IDs. You also have the election administrators on the back end. It's much easier to in the data as opposed to hand scanning them in that we did up until now. So I think e-poll books were a huge success. One thing that I'll note is that we asked all of the polling places that use the electronic poll books to also print their paper poll book, just in case there was something to happen on election day. And every single instance, there was no need to open the paper poll books. There were no issues. So we're really excited about the poll books, and our goal now is to get the funding so that we can roll them out statewide in 2018. Priority for the next our online voter registration piece as well. Also a legislative change where we were granted the authority to put out a voter registration portal. We got that legislation passed in April of this year, and our in-house IT staff, who is absolutely phenomenal, put together the online voter registration portal and had it rolled out on August 1st. So the legislation passed in April, and it was ready to roll on August 1st. We also did a stakeholder group where we brought groups together, the Governor's Commission on Disabilities, the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, and folks, to be sure that we got everybody's opinion when it comes to online voter registration. We're I think the 33rd state, to put it out there. There are obviously 32 other ways you can do it, and we wanted to take the best of other states and see how how other states did it, and we put together the design and testing phase where we did quite an extensive work over the summer to be sure that the portal was ready for the August 1st rollout. And we had 18,000 folks use it starting August 1st and until October 9th, which was our deadline to register to vote. And then as of today, we're up to about 25,000 folks that have used it. Obviously a small state, but it certainly did wonders for voters, certainly much easier to register to vote. Election administrators loved it because they didn't have to decipher handwriting. If you're like me, you wouldn't be able to read my voter registration form where I live my handwriting so bad. So we did hear a lot of good things with our online voter registration. We're really excited about it, and we're looking forward to expanding, continuing to modernize elections in Rhode Island. And the one thing I'll finally mention is that, to echo the sentiments of Secretary Merrill and Veronica, that certainly it's a team effort. I mentioned the EAC and the help that you all provided, but also the State Board of Elections in Rhode Island, the local cities and towns, the poll workers, ASED, NAS. I mean, it's a team effort, and I think that I certainly personally have taken advantage, reached out and used the resources because it's something that is very helpful. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel when there are so many good organizations that have such great people and experts in the field that will really make things better when it comes to elections, not only Rhode Island but certainly in the United States.
Commissioner McCormick.
For all your work on this year's elections. I agree that this was the most smooth year that I've seen in a long time, and I've been in elections for a long time. So thank you all for your hard work. I have a couple of global questions for you all, and then a couple of directed questions. My global questions. Find them. Do you have any concerns at all that our voting systems were hacked, or that outside entities changed the outcome of the election at all? And I know, Veronica, you spoke to that a little bit, but just want to know whether you have any concerns at all.
No. Not that the elections were hacked. Absolutely not.
Absolutely
The voting
no.
process.
Yeah, the voting process itself, no. In a word. I
Okay.
mean, I think we explored it quite thoroughly, actually, and it did, it raised questions. We didn't automatically just assume it was not true. And I think a great deal of effort actually went into exploring whether or not it was possible. We had many conversations with many different interest groups and others about potentially how that could happen. And I am quite satisfied that it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to hack a national election in any meaningful way.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay. One of you mentioned the importance of data, and I'd like to know what are maybe the 2 or 3 pieces of data that you found most helpful in increasing the efficiency in this particular election.
One of the things, and just going and understanding voting systems and voter registration and voter history and that reconciliation piece that I was talking about is just one of the safeguards, I guess, to ensure that there is no hacking or that an election is not rigged, is to understand where the data is coming from and understanding who are the voters and what are the ballots and what are those various compositions that go into the election building blocks. And so understanding the data really does mean understanding the data down to the finest, the most minute point. That's the way that if you have safeguards and if you're assessing what your results should be and what those various outcomes have to be, that has proved again for us to be very valuable to understanding data going in, data coming out.
So checks and balances, I'm hearing. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Either.
One thing I'll mention with data, 2 points anyway, that the online voter registration piece, I think data really drives the online registration. I know we used a lot of statistics when we were getting the legislation passed about how much more accurate it makes the voter rolls with what other states have seen. And we certainly use the fact that one of the other things with security, but you also have the voting list that was also mentioned quite a bit during this election cycle, are who they say they are and are voting in the right locations. And I think online voter registration really helps to that happens. And I think we did use a lot of data in preparation for our online registration. And the other thing that I'll mention too, and we saw this on Election Day in Rhode Island because it was the first time we used electronic poll books, but we were able to see kind of the ebbs and flows of Election Day when it comes to turnout. And while it's tough to use it on Election Day for the particular election, we certainly will take that data for future elections and see when is it that people vote most time periods. Clearly in the morning before work, we saw that. I think that's something that everyone experiences. But then there were a few other things throughout the day that we were kind of surprised at, and I think that we're now take that data and use it to further the modernization of elections. Perhaps shifting poll workers to locations where they're needed, depending on turnout. So I think that going forward, the data that is generated from e-poll books is going to be very, very helpful.
Great. Thank you, all of you, for those answers. And Rob, you kind of guessed at one of my questions about the online voter registration. What kind of safeguards, you kind of mentioned this, but what kind of safeguards did you have in place to assure that there were no cyber issues with your voter registration list? What kind of backups? What do you do to make sure that data is accurate?
Yeah, so our IT team has multiple backups, and I'm not a technical person, so I the right lingo and all that. But we certainly took that very seriously, and our IT team did a job with working with DHS and with other folks to be sure that our system was operating, and we had nightly dumps of the data, and we compared and did reconciliations quite frequently to be sure that the folks that actually hit submit at their computer, that their records came over properly. And so there were numerous reconciliation pieces, and I think that's important because you want to make sure that folks that are registering to vote, actually we get their information. And there were no issues on Election Day of people saying, well, I registered online and it didn't go through. So I think reconciliation is the biggest piece when it comes to making sure that the data is secure, and also that people's information are coming over properly.
Do you keep them in separate places then to make sure that? So you mentioned a paper backup on your e-poll book. So I'm assuming you keep this information in several places?
Yes, absolutely. Redundancy is huge, yep.
And then, thank you for telling us about the transition to the new voting equipment. On Election Day, did you have any comments, good or bad, about the change in equipment? And do you have any advice to the other states who are considering purchasing new voting equipment?
I think the as far as the advice on new voting equipment, it's just, you know, do the homework and have I think the stakeholder group was extremely important. I think when you have just elections folks who live, eat, and breathe this stuff, you want to make sure that you get folks who just come up to vote once every 2 years or every 4 years. You want to make sure everybody is brought to the table, and I think that was extremely important. We got a lot of good feedback from the League of Women Voters and Common Cause and the ACLU and other folks when it comes to that stuff. And so I think collaboration is key, both with the voting equipment and the electronic poll books. And we did get good feedback, especially on the electronic poll books. Again, for voters, poll workers, election administrators, it went over very well. And then the new voting equipment as well. One thing that I point out with the new voting equipment is that the old voting equipment, if you when you put your ballot in, if there was an overvote, it would automatically spit the ballot back out and indicate to the voter that there was an overvote. Sometimes the voter would have already walked away, and here their ballot is laying outside the machine. Well, the new machines allow for the voter to make a selection on the screen, not a selection for candidates, but if their ballot is put into the machine and it's overvoted, a message pops up without the ballot being ejected saying, you've overvoted this ballot. Do you want to either cast it or get send it back to you, and you can go get a new ballot? And voters really enjoyed that because they didn't have their vote flapping there on the hanging outside the machine. It was just one thing that I can think of that the new voting equipment allows for, and it was. But we have gotten good feedback overall on the equipment and the e-poll books.
Great, thank you, Mr. Rock. Mr. Graffenreid, you mentioned about the lawsuits and things in North Carolina. There was always this Purcell rule where changes weren't supposed to be made close to the election, but you had lots of changes going on because of the court decisions and the lawsuits. What was your method of communicating these issues and decisions to your 100 counties to stay in front of it?
Right. Email. Definitely email. And we engage with our counties routinely. We also did little mini weekly webinars or little training sessions just to go through. So it was giving them the information that they needed, when it became available to us. Sometimes that was challenging. Things were changing, but just putting together comprehensive numbered memos and just comprehensive step-by-step, this is what you're supposed to do, without having a lot of prose into it, but just what are the basic steps that they needed to do to conduct the election. It also helped, again, those voting site resources that the State Board of Elections. We prepared some we did implement voter ID for the primary, and then due to litigation for the general election, we did not have voter ID. So we reprinted those voting site training manuals, over 15,000 of them that the State Board of Elections funded. So just open, engaged communication with our counties.
Yeah, it just goes to the resiliency and flexibility of election administrators and how you all are on top of things. It's quite a tribute to the hard work that you all do. On the technology piece, can you give me some insight on the training on technology that you gave to your counties and to your locals and your poll workers?
Well, I mean, with the litigation and elections administration, really the technology for voting systems is we're still using what we purchased, with HAVA funds from 2005, 2006. With the electronic poll books, we're training them using software simulations or, just guidance, from resource manuals, I guess. So there really hasn't been anything per se in terms of technology in North Carolina at this point. We don't have online voter registration yet. Hopefully it's coming. We're the 9th most populous state in the United States, and the fact that there are 33 other states that are offering online voter registration to me suggests that there's something that we can certainly do on that front, and I think it's coming. In terms of the election reporting technology that I mentioned, That too is just providing them the training that they need. We do a lot with webinars and just guiding them through. Another thing that we do in terms of technology or election technology in general, again, goes to that end-to-end testing that I spoke of. And that end-to-end testing is not just, the logic and accuracy testing involved with the voting equipment, but it really is understanding that they should conduct, and we work with them to conduct a simulated election event prior to every single election and going through all of the procedural steps and all of the functional steps. And that's how on election day, for the most part, it was pretty smooth, with a couple of exceptions.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all your hard work in North Carolina. And Secretary Merrill, it's so good to have you here, both personally and on behalf of NAS, who we consider one of our really closest partners in this election business. You mentioned communication with DHS and other intelligence organizations. Unfortunately, the lack of communication is really causing some issues, I think, with trust and concerns that perhaps intelligence is politicized. And I just wanted to mention that we look forward to better communication in the future. There were a lot of concerns with cybersecurity, and open communication with at least the chief election officials, I think, is very important. Do you want to add to that at all?
Well, we will stay involved. I think it's very important that we're all at the table when these discussions are going on, but we need to come up with some rapid response kind of system where if there really is a serious threat, and so far I haven't heard that there really has been, but we need to be prepared. But there needs to be some communication system where we can get the information to the states where it belongs in a rapid way. So hopefully, we're going to keep working, but it's good that we all need to stay on top of this and involved to make sure that there's, that the proper routes are taken, because it can go in different directions, and I don't want to see that. I think the fact that this election was really so smooth despite all the challenges is proof that we're on the right track. So as long as we keep talking and develop, I think it's going to keep going. I think there will continue to be concerns. Just today, you had a hack of 1 billion Yahoo accounts. And every time that happens, of course, we all maintain our concern about all these things. So I think it's a healthy concern. I just want to make sure that we're all communicating in the proper way.
Right. I mean, I was shocked, as you mentioned several times, that we got briefed, and then the same day saw government officials out giving stories to the press that
Right.
we did not hear about in our briefings.
Exactly.
So we were very shocked sometimes to see some of the things we saw in the media. You mentioned the audit that Connecticut does. How long did that entire process take?
The field test, an hour,
An hour.
something like that. Yeah, where usually it takes.
Well worth the time.
Yeah, usually it takes days and hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars of staff time.
That's great.
Yep.
We urge other states to follow in Connecticut's doing. And then as far as media, you mentioned 2 points that we were able to get out, that the election system is decentralized and that no one's connected to the internet, at least the actual voting machines, or at least in your state.
Right.
Do you have 1 or 2 other points that you think voters or the media really need to know about elections?
I think they need to understand all the checks and balances that are in place. And I think that's starting to happen because in our state, we've always had a situation where before the election, we do a public opening of the machines, a public testing of the cards, and no one ever showed up before. Suddenly, people were going. And when we got questions about election process, we were able to say, listen, if you want to know more, volunteer as a poll worker. Go to these open processes. And the media was more interested. So I really feel, I had 2 press conferences in my office with a voting machine to demonstrate to people exactly how the whole process works from beginning to end, right through the audit process. Those sorts of things I think are helpful. People need to understand all the systems that are in place to protect against fraud.
I agree. I think all of your comments support the transparency, actually, that is in the election process, and that the general public ought to be taking advantage of the transparency. We do open, our election officials do open the process up in numerous ways, and unfortunately, many people who criticize the system don't even participate in those opportunities. So I want to mention that I appreciate all the openness that you all have with the voters and with the media in our election process. And then one other question, you mentioned that you have no early voting in Connecticut, but you do now have same-day registration and voting, and that you had 35,000 people on election day come in to vote. Did you see any kind of lines?
We tried to avoid that. There was one city that had some lines, and I think that's the other thing that I think we need to all be paying attention to, and basically I'd call it management skills. You know, a lot of the lines form because they don't have enough staff, haven't divided the lists appropriately. We were able to quickly intervene in that one situation, which is in one of the cities in Connecticut. And the mayor actually stopped everything and put all the staff in City Hall on the job of getting people through these lines, and it worked. So, you know, if you have plans, the planning piece is something I think we need to start paying a lot more attention to. And I happen to think that elections is short on metrics, always has been. Ever since my colleague Heather Gerken at Yale published a book called The Democracy Index about maybe almost 10 years ago now, you know, laying out the lack of data that we do have in elections. We're much better now. And I think online voter registration, for example, has enabled us to we've had it in place for about 2 years now. And you can get a lot of metrics about who's registering, who's using it by age, by geographic district. But we also have a system where it goes to the local registrar, and that local registrar has to confirm the registration. So again, a backup system to a backup system. And that's important too. But I think we need to know a lot more about voters as customers, if you will, about how they're actually using these systems before we go spend a lot of money developing systems that might not be the most usable for the public. We really have to turn it on its head, I think, and start looking at the public. They're the users. They're the ones we have to make feel comfortable with all this and make them understand the transparency and the checks and balances. So I think as we get more metrics, we'll be able to deal with that more effectively.
And the new technology is definitely helping with that, right?
Exactly.
So e-poll books, we know who's voting when and where. Really
Right.
helpful information. So that's one great thing about the technology that you all are
Yeah.
using now. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Masterson.
Thank you, and thank you to all three of you for being willing to spend some time with us. I'm surprised you're not sitting on a beach somewhere trying to decompress from this latest election. First, let me start, Secretary Merrill, with a thank you to you and your colleagues at NAS. Throughout the entire conversation around rigging, hacking, whatever else, you all showed tremendous bipartisan effort to combat that conversation, and I think that leadership was critical to calming the waters a little bit across the United States. And so you and your colleagues deserve a great deal of credit in the way that you messaged that and carried that forward. My next comment / question goes to both you and Mr. Rock, and that is the rhetorical question of, are you nuts implementing same-day registration, a brand new voting system, online registration, and e-poll books in a presidential election year? And so my question to you is, outside of are you crazy, is what did you learn? So it's not, I don't think, a recommended practice in a presidential election year, but you certainly get a high enough volume, right, that you get greater lessons learned than perhaps you would in a low turnout election. So I'm interested from the both of you, and then Veronica, if you want to weigh in even with your election night reporting experience in a presidential election year, which is also a little kooky to roll out in a presidential election year. I'd love your feedback on what you learned doing that in such a high volume year.
Well, first I have to qualify by saying we did have Election Day registration first 2 years ago. So this is the first presidential year we've had it. And what we used as a measure for trying to assess how many people were going to show up in any particular jurisdiction was the presidential ballot. The the one where you can come in and you don't register, the federal requirement in a presidential year where you can come in and just vote for president, but you don't have to register. So we figured it would be a rough estimate, and it worked out pretty well. That was pretty much the estimate of who showed up. We also did institute for the second year our election management / results reporting system, and it was daunting. I mean, because of all the training you have to do and to get it in place. I mean, it was rough in a way, because the problem is the public wants results really quickly. We want results really accurately, also quick within reason. And, those two things don't always coincide because it's very difficult to be both accurate and fast. So we still have some work to do on, it's the inputting is the problem, not the system. The system works beautifully. It's the training and experience you have to have with the local people who are doing the inputting that's the challenge. So I would not say it's perfect yet. We bifurcated our results reporting. So previously we required not only who won and lost, but also how many people voted, all the kind of things you certify. We required that all within 2 days, I think it was. Now what we said is all you have to send us on election night is the results, who won, who lost, because that's honestly all anybody wants to know on election night. And we did pretty well. They were supposed to report by midnight. I think by the next morning we had all of them in by 9 in the next morning, which is very good on that score. There was a lot more lag time for the rest of the information because people were still, getting used to inputting it all and who's going to do it, and there were a lot of questions. We probably should keep a help desk in place for a while to make sure that we walk people through it. But, it's first big year. So we didn't really institute all this in the same year.
So what she's saying,
there was a field test.
Mr. Rock, is you're the crazy one at the table. So love to hear your lessons learned from doing that in the presidential year.
Well, I think, first and foremost, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, is it just goes to show you the great community we have in the elections world. I mean, I think there's no way that we ever thought we could do it alone or do it with just our team, but the State Board of Elections, the EAC, so many national and local organizations. I just think that we learned what teamwork can really do. I mean, we felt that because we were using equipment that was so old that we didn't want to have any issues. We don't ever want to have an issue in any election, but with an election this big, we wanted to be sure that we had the right technology in place. And I think that it all comes down to working together. And I have a very Secretary Gorbea is very goal-driven and wants to make things better. And there was no need to, if we had the tools and the technology and the ability to do it, then why not do it? And again, I thank everyone that was involved, because it certainly wasn't something that it was just the Secretary of State's office. It was a team effort, and I think that was the biggest thing. And that's why I stressed to your question, Commissioner, about what do you suggest for another organization that's going to look to buy voting equipment, is just to bring people together and just know that there are people out there, not just in your state, but in the rest of the country, that can offer really valuable information.
So a general question, I'll start with you, Veronica. We talk a lot about security, especially this year. The original purpose behind the HAVA systems, at least in large part, was accessibility, right? Making sure that voters with disabilities, and really all voters, can vote privately and independently. In a long time, I think in this election community, we talked about them as if they were competing interests. And the reality is, in order to have a process that has integrity, it both has to be accessible and secure. They're not choices. They're both mandates in a lot of ways. And so my question to you is, moving forward as you look to innovate, how will you approach the challenge of keeping a secure process that also has the level of access that's required, I guess? How do you look at that opportunity to innovate in that way?
That's a tough question.
Well,
that's tough.
let me see if I can make it a little easier for you in this way. That's the challenge to us as we write the standards, right? As we're looking, and that's just the voting system piece. That's not the piece as a whole. That's just the voting systems. And so feedback from you all as an elections community about how you find that that spot to be able to do both. It's not one or the other, right? What is important to us. You have processes, you have procedures, you have a desire to serve voters in the way that they're living their lives, right? Because that's the expectation you're hearing, but you're also getting challenged on the security front. And so that as we look at the standards, that's the questions we're asking ourselves. And so I guess I'm looking for feedback to do that better.
Essentially, you're asking about the holistic approach, right? And so I think it goes to what Rob was saying about, engaging the stakeholders and just not allowing anything that you do to strictly and solely come from election officials or the geeks, who do it every single day, but also the people who know absolutely nothing about elections and who want to learn. And so I think that should be very, very much the focus in anything that we do in terms of modernizing elections, and that's including the public, the advocacy groups, sometimes the media, and just everyone. I'll give you an example about why that should work, and that goes to when North Carolina implemented its election night reporting. It was actually 2014 during the midterms, and in the primary, when we first released it, we had to fail. The media was used to seeing those results come in pretty quickly, and we noticed that the results were accurate, except for that the precincts reporting was a little bit off. And so that was just one little part that we had missed in our testing. But we weren't necessarily looking or focused in on that. We wanted to make sure the aggregation was correct. Engaging the media into that, because they zeroed in on that. They wanted to know which those results, where are they coming from? So immediately they were able to point out, on election night in May, I guess, of 2014, that there was an issue. Going forward, we enhanced our system because of those lessons learned, and also just looking at it from the candidate perspective. And so those are just some of the things that we all need to continue to do. It's just to engage all aspects of the community, whether they're election officials, media, advocacy groups, and certainly the voter.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think, especially when we did our procurement for voting equipment and the online voter registration, bringing people to the table, we had the Governor's Commission on Disabilities and the Rhode Island Disability Law Center that really drove some of the decisions that were made. I mean, they gave some great suggestions. I mean, as did all, just specific to your question, but all organizations really came to the table and offered things that we wanted to make sure we implemented. And we had the accessibility study done with our OVR portal, and we had, while I talked about the stakeholder group for the RFP for the voting equipment, we had a smaller group because by law only allows us to have 5 people evaluate the voting equipment, and we wanted to be sure that the Governor's Commission on Disabilities was one of the 5 members because we want to be sure that accessibility is a question that came up and continues to come up, and we want to make sure that the decisions we make are inclusive of every single organization possible, and that's why Secretary Gorbea feels it very big to bring in everybody. And it might increase the amount of time with good policy, takes longer, but I think in the end it's the best decision.
I have a slightly different take on it because I feel like all of us have just learned a powerful message about security in terms of technological security. Frequently there are pressures brought to bear on us to do things like internet voting, and that's been a big pressure since I've been elected legislatively. There were groups that want internet voting. And I feel like we have to be the ones that do a lot of work on how secure these systems really are, because there are pressures. The results reporting, the pressure came from the media in our state. We weren't getting the results fast enough, that they had to have the AP stringers out there getting the results, and they weren't paying those people anymore. So they started looking to our office to produce the fast results. I tried to help with that. I said, yes, it's true. But then you run into this accuracy versus speed question and a lot of other questions that were raised about the security of these systems, among other things. So I'm fortunate because I have UConn's voting center to do a lot of this background work for us. I actually got bond funds in Connecticut to purchase poll books. We went to UConn to give us advice about which poll books, what should be the standards for those poll books. we have still not been able to come up with a system that they feel is secure enough, because most of them can be plugged into your voter registration system and potentially, change it, damage it in some way. So we're really struggling with this balance between the usability, the needs and wants of all users, and the security of the systems. And I feel like I'm moving more toward the security end of things after this current year and all the questions that have been raised. For me, the integrity of these systems is paramount. The public must maintain faith in the fact that their vote is being counted and counted properly. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on this issue of making sure we're really testing well the security of these systems. And I would say more states perhaps ought to take advantage of UConn, and I know there's a few other centers of that sort throughout the country. I think there's one in Georgia, one in Indiana, and another one. They could be brought to bear on some of this if needed.
Thank you. I just have two final requests, not questions, and one is for you, Secretary Merrill, and that is, I don't know if you're planning on doing something, and I'm not trying to create work for your staff, but some sort of feedback report follow-up on the audit process that you instituted using the EAC grant money, and how we can take that information, including perhaps the system itself, and share it with other states. I mean, that's the purpose of the EAC grants, right? And so we will work with you and talk to you about the best way to highlight the great work that both you and UConn did using that money to look at auditing processes.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm sure we are doing a final report for you for the use of the funds. And certainly I'd like to do some workshops around the country. We'll probably do something at NAS, maybe at NASED, I don't know. But we're certainly open to it, and I know UConn would be happy to share the information.
Awesome. And then for all three of you highlighted the need that I think all of us in elections are aware of is ongoing and complete training. And at the EAC, we have a kind of piloted class on election official as an IT manager. It's something that we want to work with states and locals to share and improve on. But the question or request I have for you all is to think about how the EAC can be helpful in that ongoing goal of training. You all are told constantly, you need to train better, you need to train more, with no increase in resources, whatnot. And so I think that's an area where we might be able to be helpful in a variety of ways. And so any thoughts you'd have on that moving forward would be helpful. And then finally, I just want to thank you for highlighting the great work of our testing and certification team on the RFP, both for e-poll books and voting systems. It's something we're going to push next year as states look to purchase new systems. It's a service we love to provide. We love working with states and locals on RFPs. It's a way to save money. It's a way to save time for those states and locals. And so I hope more people will take advantage of that. So with that, I'm done. And thank you, all three.
Thank you all again for coming in and using your time to educate us a little bit more on how the election went in 2016. Secretary Merrill, I want to thank you for appearing with me on C-SPAN when you were talking about the numerous occasions of being at the media. I think that all of us had just numerous requests over and over again where we had to do a actual graph to dole those things out. And I think that we all did a great job in terms of trying our best to educate. I think that a lot of folks didn't understand it, but we did our best that we could. One of the good things about working with these two up here is that we mostly agree on 90% of things. And so they've asked a lot of the questions that I want to ask, but I still have a few that I want to ask out because I am really interested in the audit and what sort of feedback that you've gotten from that. But I have a general question and then a few individual questions. The general question is, what sort of lessons did you learn during the primary that you were able to change for the general election in terms of just overall improving the election process, if anything?
One of the big ones was for us, again, it goes to using the data and reconciliation. We have always looked at the data from the voter registration perspective, but also utilizing now the data that can be derived from the vote tabulation software in terms of ballots cast. We did have an incident that happened in one of our counties in the primary, and what it led to is to help our counties train better, or in the boards of the county boards of elections, helping them understand what goes into authenticating the count when they canvass their election, and that you really are comparing the number of ballots cast to the number of people who voted across at the precinct level, whether it's election day precincts or the administrative precincts like voting by mail or provisional precincts. And so, or the number of, Democrats versus Republicans versus, in our state, unaffiliated or libertarians who voted. I mean, there are little snippets of details that can be looked at that you will know that your results are accurate. And so we've improved upon that process for the general, and we'll continue to utilize the vote tabulation software and the data that's in that, and also look to our voting systems vendor, I believe, who's going to be testifying as well, that we do want some improvements on that front as we look towards the future.
Yeah, I think for us, the primary was the first time we used the new voting equipment and the pilot program, and I think the comfortability of poll workers and election officials just by using the equipment. I mean, you can be trained on it and use it, in a test environment, but when you actually use it on election day, really is the best way to get a sense of it. And I think that just like we were told from the beginning, the poll workers are really going to love this stuff. And I think that just the fact that they were able to use it and be more comfortable led to more confidence with everybody, administrators, poll workers, and voters on election day. So I think just using the new technology in a real environment was essential.
Right.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I didn't mention we also have new disability voting machines this year, and that is for the first time, and it went very well, but we did test them out in the primary, and that was very important.
Great.
So.
Great. Misty Graffenried, one of the things that I didn't hear too much about was I believe that North Carolina, being the 9th populous state, also has, I believe, the largest military facility in the world at Fort Bragg. What sort of challenges were faced by the military folks who might have been deployed overseas in terms of casting their ballots, and what lessons did you learn from that?
We learned those lessons when I started in the State Board of Elections in 2008. This country was in 2 wars, and so there were a lot of challenges in 2008 with military and overseas voters having the ability to effectively request their ballots, receive their ballots, and cast their ballots. So we've worked over the past 2 presidential election terms to improve the access to voting for UOCAVA voters. So this election, it went pretty smooth. Most of our UOCAVA voters are using email, and North Carolina allows its military and overseas voters to request their ballot, receive their ballot, and even return their ballot electronically via email. And so they're scanning those ballots in, or sometimes if a scanner is not available, they will take a picture of the ballot and email it to us. And then I think if there's any challenge in that, I mean, it's more of a challenge to the election officials and not necessarily the voters. And that's just having to duplicate those ballots so that they can be tabulated accurately. And that's a very time-consuming, very tedious process. So from what I've heard, I haven't heard any bad things. I haven't heard any anything coming from that population that they did not have the opportunity to cast their ballot.
Right.
Proudly to say.
We heard a lot about security during this election cycle, and we've been hearing from our board members and media as well overall in terms of machines themselves having a lot of features. But we also know that, I'm sure our certification process is going to talk about this, that there's no EAC certified equipment that is connected to the internet as well. That doesn't mean that those systems don't have that function. It just means that, as Secretary Merrill was talking about, those functions just need to be turned off. And so I think that, to re-emphasize that you all agree that the election was not hacked or influenced through using machines themselves. which I think is, a powerful statement as well. Looking towards the 2018 election cycle, we've already started that, do you have any sort of requests from the EAC on how to help you get through that as well? Or, also, what sort of things are you looking forward to in terms of 2018? I know that, we're already trying to get away from 2016, but I know that, after Christmas and after New Year's, people are going to start gearing up again. So we want to be there to help you as much as possible.
I would say continue to be the information portal for in my case, states, because I think when you have other states and other jurisdictions putting their information and giving their information to you, and then you providing it to everybody else really helps. I just think just to continue to be that information clearinghouse it certainly has helped us quite a bit, and I certainly will. I assume it'll continue. That we'll keep using your resources. So that would be my request.
Yes, absolutely. Please continue to be the information portal. We're going to be working on a number of things in North Carolina in the next few years, certainly with new voting equipment, possibly because of the decertification for some of our DREs, but also just the information that you have put on your website about training election officials is very valuable. And also the best practices, that portal that you also have available that other states have placed their training materials is helpful, because we want to move towards more of that and provide, I think, Commissioner McCormick, you asked about, technology. What are we doing using technology? One of the things is absolutely training videos or just learning management systems, right? We want to move more towards that, just having a more effective, efficient way of providing that training across the board to election officials. And that's something that your site has and your clearinghouse site. And we want to continue to utilize those resources.
Yeah, I guess I would only add, it was obviously, I think, a very good use of a small amount of money relatively to develop products like the one we just developed for the automated audit. It was $230,000, I think, very well spent. I don't know, we all know about budget situations, so just to see if there could be some small development grant program would be terrific. And I think we could do a lot with it. You're hearing there's a lot of needs. A lot of us have just developed so many new systems. It feels to me like we have to kind of consolidate what we're doing. I feel like we've done a lot of new things. They're just beginning to bear fruit, really. And so if we can just continue to get support on that. I know some states are far ahead of others, and that's a concern nationally, I would say. I mean, some of us, I think Connecticut uses a lot of these best practices, but I know there are many states that don't. So continuing to help kind of equitable distribution of all this is helpful to sort of standardize American elections as much as we can and give every voter the same experience. So.
Unless my fellow commissioners have any other questions, I want to thank this panel again for all your hard work, and thank you again for getting us through this election cycle. And if you have any additional comments, please provide that to us. And hopefully you'll be open to any additional questions we may have down the road. But again, I bid you safe travels home and excuse you from this panel. And then give a 3-minute break for the next panel to be